Teacher jokingly asked a janitor's son to play the violin, but his performance shocked everyone. The school auditorium was packed tighter than usual. It was the final period on a rainy Thursday, and students were restless. The hum of chatter echoed off the tall windows and old walls of Greenville Junior High. Rows of wooden chairs creaked as students shifted, whispering, laughing, waiting for something interesting to break the monotony of the assembly. At the front stood Mr. Leonidas, the head of the music department, tall and confident, with slicked-back grey hair and a tone that often teetered between sarcastic and smug. Known for his old-school discipline and sharp tongue, he viewed teaching less as nurturing talent and more as asserting control. That day, he was presenting a live demonstration of classical techniques to his 7th grade class. It was more of a show than a lesson, and like any good showman, Mr. Leonidas enjoyed having a punchline. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on a quiet boy in the 3rd row, Eli, thin, slightly slouched, in a patched school uniform that had clearly seen better days. His backpack sat on his lap, one strap frayed, one zipper jammed. He was usually invisible, and that's how he liked it, but not today. Mr. Leonidas smirked. "Eli Samir," he said, drawing out the name with theatrical flair. "Why don't you come up here and show us what you've got? I heard your father's." "The janitor here? Maybe you've been mopping up musical talent from the floor, The room erupted in giggles. Eli froze. His classmates turned to stare. Some leaned forward in anticipation. Others smirked in mock sympathy. Everyone, including Eli, knew this wasn't an invitation. It was a joke, a setup, a show of power. Eli stood slowly, not because he wanted to, but because something inside him said this was one of those moments, the kind that split your life into a before and after. From behind the curtain, a dusty old-school violin was handed to him. It wasn't his. It didn't have to be. His fingers knew what to do. He stood at the center of the room, small in stature but strangely calm. What no one in that room knew, not even Mr. Leonidas, was that Eli hadn't touched this violin before. But he had held one, just like it almost every night. In the basement of the school, where Samir swept the halls and scrubbed the bathrooms, there was a narrow storage room with flickering lights and a faint smell of paint thinner. Hidden behind cleaning supplies, a folding chair, and a tattered music stand, Eli had spent hours with an old violin, his father's. It wasn't supposed to be that way. Years ago, Samir had been a promising music student at a university in Karachi. He had trained in Eastern and Western classical styles, but poverty and family obligations forced him to drop out before he could finish. When he migrated to the US with his son, after his wife passed away, he brought only 2 things with him: a framed photo of his wife and that violin. Eli had grown up watching his father caress the strings with calloused fingers, sometimes playing lullabies, sometimes silence. "Music doesn't need an audience," Samir often said. "It just needs truth." Back in the auditorium, Eli adjusted the violin under his chin. The room was now pin-drop silent. Even the laughter had shrunk into uneasy stillness. He didn't bow or speak. He just played. At first the sound was fragile, like a thread pulled through a needle. A few uneven notes, a squeak. Mr. Leonidas chuckled. A few students exchanged glances, ready to laugh. But then, like a rising tide, the melody found its rhythm. It wasn't a classical piece, not something from the curriculum. It was Eli's own composition, a raw blend of everything he had absorbed. From his father's stories, YouTube recordings, and long nights alone with the instrument. A blend of loss and longing, of searching and stubborn hope. The room transformed, heads tilted, jaws lowered, even the teachers in the back straightened in their seats. Each note spoke of something too big for words, something only music could carry. When the final note lingered in the air and faded like a breath, there was nothing but silence, a long, holy silence. Then came a single clap, then another. Then the whole room stood, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. Eli didn't smile. He simply bowed his head and returned the violin. As he stepped off the stage, Mr. Leonidas said nothing. His arms were crossed, face unreadable. The smirk was gone. Something had shifted. The day Eli was born, it rained in Karachi. Not the kind of soft drizzle that people wrote poetry about, but a heavy, unrelenting monsoon that soaked the roads and forced even the noise of the city to take a pause. His father, Samir, stood in the hallway of a crowded public hospital, clutching a borrowed umbrella in one hand and a tattered violin case in the other. The nurse came out and handed him a blanket-wrapped bundle. His wife, Meher, was gone. Complications. No time to prepare. From that moment, Samir stopped playing the violin. The instrument was kept in a cloth case under the bed of a one-room flat, only occasionally touched. Life moved on as it must. Samir worked small jobs, saved little by little, and when Eli was 6, they left everything behind and moved to the US under a sponsorship program for skilled workers. He got a janitor job at Greenville Junior High, and Greenville became home. Samir never complained. His hands were always tired, his eyes often red, but his heart stayed soft, especially when Eli asked him about the violin. "You used to play?" Eli had asked once, holding the old case like a fragile treasure. "I still do," Samir replied, "just not loud enough for the world to hear." Every evening after school, while other kids were riding bikes or playing video games, Eli would go to the school basement and wait for his father to finish his rounds. He would sit beside the mop bucket, his backpack open, books untouched, eyes following Samir's every move. One day, Samir unlocked the old janitor closet and said, "Come in." Inside, between a shelf of disinfectant and a broken broom, Samir opened a tiny wooden cabinet. The violin sat inside. It was aged, faded at the edges, with one tuning peg chipped and rosin dust lining the strings like snow. Samir handed it to Eli, not ceremoniously, just gently, as if passing a secret too important to speak of. "Try it," he said. From that night on, the janitor's closet became their studio. There were no lessons, no music books, no formal scales. Samir taught Eli by sound and instinct. "Listen before you play. Feel it before you hold it," he would say. Eli learned to mimic birdsong, to echo the hush of wind under the school bleachers, to pour his loneliness into bow strokes. Sometimes they practiced for hours. Other times, Samir would play one note and say, "That's enough for today. Let it echo inside." Eli loved that room. It smelled of bleach and possibility. At school, no one knew. To most teachers, Eli was quiet, average, easy to forget. He wore second-hand shoes and never brought a lunchbox. He didn't raise his hand in class. But every evening in secret, he built a world from sound. Samir, for all his sacrifices, never told Eli about his own past in full. Only fragments. That he once played in an orchestra. That he was offered a spot in a national music conservatory. That he lost everything when his father fell ill, and he had to choose between paying tuition and saving his family. He chose family. Meher, his late wife, had always believed music was a divine gift. After her death, Samir couldn't bear to play, but Eli's curiosity slowly reopened that door. Still, Samir feared it. What if I let him dream too much? He would often wonder. What if I raise his hopes only for the world to crush them? But Eli's progress was undeniable. He started composing tiny tunes of his own, just 4 or 5 notes, repeating in odd rhythms. He once took a nursery rhyme and flipped it backward. Samir was stunned, not by the technique, but by the voice in it. "You don't play like me," he said. "You play like someone who's been waiting for years to be heard." Then came that Thursday when Mr. Leonidas called Eli up as a joke. That night, Samir didn't say a word as they walked home. Not even when Eli mentioned that someone from the music world, Thomas Rain, had spoken to him after the performance. Rain had been in town scouting young talents for a new youth scholarship program at the Ryan Academy of Music, based near Boston. No one knew he was in the room when Eli played. No one expected him to walk down after the applause, extend a hand and say, "We need to talk." Eli repeated those words to his father. Still, Samir stayed silent. They walked past the grocery store, the used bookstore, the gas station near their apartment complex. Finally, as they reached their building, Samir stopped under a streetlight and said, "If this man is real, and if he truly heard what I heard, then maybe, just maybe, this is your open door." The next day, a letter arrived from the Ryan Academy: full scholarship, housing, food, healthcare, a spot in the Young Composers program, all expenses covered. All because of 3 minutes of music. Eli stared at the paper in disbelief. Samir placed his hand on his shoulder and whispered, "But remember, this journey, it won't be easy. Music is not for applause. It's for truth. If you're ready, I'll walk beside you, but only until the door. After that, it's all you." Eli nodded. He had been practicing for this moment all his life. He just didn't know it until now. The violin in Eli's hands was as old as the last time. The bow was worn, but his movements were precise. And then he started playing. This time, it wasn't a classical piece. He chose a contemporary composition, one he had written himself, based loosely on a motif from Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. It was risky, it wasn't academic, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The music came in waves. At first there were thin, almost transparent sounds, like a light rain tapping gently against window glass. Then slowly they grew. The notes gathered momentum, their edges sharper, their rhythm more daring, the sound swelling with a confidence that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than technique. Eli seemed not to notice the audience at all. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing to say something, to say, "I am here. I can do this, I don't ask for permission." When he finished, there was absolute silence. No applause. Not at first, just stillness. A long, suspended breath. Then came the first claps, timid, unsure, then louder. Louder still, then the entire auditorium erupted in applause. Someone jumped to their feet, someone whistled. This was no longer entertainment. This was a confession. In the front row, Mr. Leonidas sat stiffly. His face revealed nothing, but his hands, once crossed tightly across his chest, now rested slowly on his knees. The smirk that had curled on his lips before Eli played was gone, and in its place a kind of disbelief, not admiration, not yet, but awareness behind him. Some teachers whispered to each other. Where did he learn that? That wasn't even on the syllabus. I've never heard something like that come from a student. Rain, seated quietly in the third row, leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the boy who had just lowered the violin. He didn't clap, not right away. He simply sat there, watching, as though measuring something more than talent. Eli stood motionless. His heart was pounding. His fingers buzzed. The bow trembled just a little between his fingertips, but not from fear, from release. He had carried this moment in his chest like a locked box for years, and now it had opened. He handed the violin back to the assistant, gave a tiny nod, and walked toward the wings. As he passed by Mr. Leonidas, the teacher said nothing, but their eyes met, and for a flicker of a moment, Eli could tell that something had changed. Not everything, but something. Outside the auditorium, Eli leaned against a pillar and exhaled deeply. The hallway was dim, lined with trophies from years past and faded school portraits. His hands still tingled. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Rain. The man didn't say much at first. He simply stood beside Eli and watched him. Then softly he said, "That wasn't a performance. That was a statement." Eli turned his head but didn't speak. Rain continued, "You were telling someone something, maybe the room, maybe the world, maybe yourself. But I heard it." Eli blinked. Rain held out a small card. On it, embossed in simple letters, Ryan Academy of Music, Thomas Rain, Director Youth Talent Program. "We need to talk," Rain said. "Soon." And with that, he turned and walked away. Eli held the card like it was made of gold leaf. That night, back at home, Samir sat across the table from Eli in their modest apartment kitchen. A single light bulb flickered overhead. Steam rose from 2 cups of chai. Samir had already heard what happened. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He had seen it in his son's eyes when he walked through the door. "You said it, didn't you?" Samir finally asked. Eli looked up. "Said what?" Samir smiled faintly. "Whatever needed to be said." Eli nodded. "Good." They sat in silence for a while. Then Samir took a small notebook from the drawer. It was old, and the pages were yellowed. Inside were notes, musical fragments, phrases, ideas. "My compositions," Samir said. "Before I stopped." Eli turned. "A page carefully. You wrote these?" "Yes. For concerts that never happened." He paused. "I want you to have them." Eli looked at his father, stunned. "But what if you want to play again?" Samir shook his head. "I've already played my part. Now it's your turn." Back at school the next day, the energy in the hallways was strange. Eli was no longer invisible. People didn't whisper his name, but they stared. Students nodded at him in passing. Some even smiled. Mr. Leonidas didn't mention the performance during class. He taught like normal, scales, rhythm drills, critiques. But when class ended and Eli stayed behind to help pack chairs, the teacher walked over. "You didn't play from sheet music." "No, sir," Eli said. "You composed it?" "Yes." Leonidas looked away, then nodded once, sharply, like it hurt a little to do so. "Well," he muttered, "don't stop." That was it. No praise, no apology, just a signal, a quiet acknowledgement, and for Eli it was enough. A few minutes after the performance, Thomas Rain approached Eli. He had been in the audience, but today, as a spectator, not a recruiter, he walked up, calm but purposeful, extended his hand and said, "There is no choice now, Eli. You must go. This is not a request. It's a duty to what you have." Eli's fingers were still cold from the strings. He looked at Rain, then at the card in his hand again. The name and academy weren't just real. They felt destined. He turned his head slightly. Samir stood at the back of the hall, his janitor uniform covered with specks of dust, but his eyes, those were gleaming. They locked eyes, and then slowly Samir nodded. Rain spoke again, gently but clearly. "We'll start filling out the paperwork tomorrow. I've already prepared everything." Eli didn't hesitate this time. "I'll go," he said calmly. Later that evening, the school auditorium was empty. Light from the street lamps filtered through the glass panes, casting long shadows on the polished wood floor. In one corner, Samir was packing up mops and supplies, going through his usual late shift. The janitor's cart squeaked across the hallway. Out of nowhere, a voice called out behind him, "Mr. Samir." He turned. It was Richard Langford, the school's largest donor, chairman of the education board, and the man behind most of the recent school renovations. A tall, polished man in a tailored suit, Langford stepped forward with his signature charming smirk. "Your son," he began, walking slowly, "is making waves already. I've had 6 calls today. One from the mayor's office, one from a music columnist. You should be proud." "I am," Samir replied simply. Langford looked at him with interest. "He's special, and now he's valuable, which brings me to why I'm here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. "I'd like to help him," Langford continued, his voice warm but layered with undertones. "Not just with the academy. Beyond that, recordings, PR, sponsorships. Turn him into a story, a project, something bigger." Samir's eyes narrowed slightly. "You want to own it," Langford chuckled. "I want to guide it. There's a difference." Samir looked at the card but didn't take it. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't a project. He's not a headline or a marketable product. He's a boy, my boy, and this is his decision, not yours." Langford's expression faltered for just a second, his jaw tightening. But then he smiled again. "Thinner this time. You can only buy what's being sold, Mr. Samir. Everything else is just negotiation." Samir didn't respond, but when he got home that night, he told Eli everything. The hallway was quiet, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Samir set the card on the table like it was something toxic. "You need to know that the world will offer you many things, Eli. Most will glitter. Most will lie. Choose the ones that feel like truth, not opportunity. Eli sat silently. Then he reached over and slid the card into the trash. We already said yes to the right one, he said. Samir exhaled. The next day, Rain returned to town. This time not as a scout, but with official papers, envelopes, and an assistant from the academy. He didn't visit the school. He went straight to their apartment. Eli answered the door, holding a towel and still smelling of shampoo. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. Everything is ready, Rain smiled. We fly out of Albany tomorrow morning. The driver will pick you both. Up at 6 a.m. It's all official, with parental consent and enrollment forms signed. Samir stepped forward. We've signed everything. Thank you for waiting. Rain nodded. I never doubted you. He handed over a neat folder with the academy's welcome letter, housing details, and class schedule. When he left, the apartment went still again. Eli went to his room to finish packing. Samir lingered in the hallway, holding something tightly. In his hands, a letter. He walked to Eli's door and knocked gently. Eli opened it. On his bed lay a half-packed suitcase. On the chair, wrapped in cloth, was his old violin. Samir hesitated, then held out the envelope. Read it on the way. Please, there are things I couldn't say out loud without breaking. Eli took it, didn't read it, just hugged him. No words. They didn't need them. That night, for the first time in years, Samir didn't return to his night shift. He simply sat in the living room in silence, sipping tea, staring at the city lights from the window. He wasn't afraid of the distance. He was afraid of the silence after Eli left. But at the same time, he knew his son was music now, and music was never truly gone. Albany International Airport, 6 a.m. The terminal was still half asleep. Soft announcements echoed across the vast space, and the smell of early morning coffee drifted from nearby kiosks. A plane blinked gently on the tarmac outside, waiting. Under the fading stars, Eli sat by the large window watching the runway. In his lap was an envelope, simple, white, slightly creased at the edges. On the front, in his father's neat, slanted handwriting, it read, "For Eli." He hadn't opened it yet. Next to him sat his worn violin case and a small gray suitcase with everything he owned, everything he was taking with him to Boston, to the Ryan Academy of Music, to a new life. Rain and his assistant sat a few seats away, chatting softly. No one was rushing Eli. The flight wouldn't leave for another 40 minutes. The world was quiet, and Eli was still. He traced the seal of the envelope with his thumb. His fingers remembered the shape of the strings, the smooth curve of the neck, the weight of the bow. But this felt heavier than all of it. He took a deep breath and opened it. Eli, if you're reading this, you're already on your way. I'm probably drinking chai back home right now, trying not to look at your empty room, trying not to cry. You've always been good at hiding storms. You walk quiet, think deep, and play like someone twice your age. I saw that in you before you ever touched my violin. It scared me. Not because I didn't believe in you, but because I did. When your mother passed, I promised myself I'd give you stability. That meant working nights, hiding my own dreams, teaching you things without letting you know I was teaching. That little closet where we played music, it saved me more than it taught you. Eli, you're stronger than I ever was, braver, sharper. You're not afraid to step into the unknown, and that alone makes you more than I could have ever raised. But there's something I want you to remember. Music isn't just about applause or perfect notes. It's about honesty, about saying something when words won't do, about healing. Don't change who you are for any stage. Don't dress your truth just to be accepted. The world will try to tell you who to be, but music knows who you are, and if ever, in a quiet moment, you feel lost, close your eyes and remember that you were once a boy playing music in a janitor's closet. And that was more than enough. If you ever lose a note or your way, just listen carefully. I'm still there, in every pause, every breath. With love, Dad Ellie's hands trembled slightly, not out of sadness, but release. His throat tightened, but he didn't cry. Instead, he folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the violin case, just under the velvet lining. A secret, a shield. He turned back to the window, and for the first time since the performance, he smiled. The flight was quiet. He barely spoke. Rain let him be. When they landed in Boston, the air felt different, colder, more focused. The drive to the academy was lined with buildings that seemed to rise like pages in a storybook. Ivy on. Stone, iron fences, long lawns freshly cut. The Ryan Academy wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The front building was made of red brick, old and elegant, with tall arched windows and a clock tower that struck every quarter hour. Inside, the hallways echoed with footsteps and soft strains of piano keys from behind closed doors. A place where every wall listened. Eli was assigned to a room in the scholarship wing, second floor, corner unit, overlooking a garden of lilacs and oaks. His roommate Luca was a quiet boy from Italy who specialized in cello. They exchanged shy smiles and helped each other unpack. His violin rested on the desk. The case still had the crease where the letter was tucked, and just like that, the quiet life Eli had known was gone. That evening, he received his orientation binder, practice schedule, 6 hours daily, weekly masterclasses, monthly showcases, theory, composition and performance assessments, a notice about the Juilliard scholarship audition, scheduled in 2 years. It all felt real now. He wasn't here to visit. He was here to become. Later that night, Eli sat alone in the practice room. Room 11B, walls covered in soundproof padding, a grand piano resting in the corner. He didn't unpack his violin yet. Instead, he looked around the room, then up at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you," to his father, to Rain, to himself, to every quiet moment that had led to this one. Then he opened the case and played, not for a class or a teacher or a test, but just to feel the wood vibrate against his shoulder, to hear his soul bounce back from the walls. The Ryan Academy of Music sat in the quiet suburbs of Boston, tucked between rows of chestnut trees and ivy-covered stone walls. The main building, a relic of the early 1900s, looked like something out of a European novel. Arched windows, carved, cornices and a bell tower that rang every hour, but inside, everything pulsed with sound. Grand pianos in every hallway. Polished wood floors that echoed softly beneath careful steps. Students rushing between rehearsals, some in pressed black suits, others in baggy sweatshirts, but all carrying instruments, violins, clarinets, guitars, cellos. Here, music wasn't just practiced, it was breathed. Expanded content begins. Eli stood in the center of it all, his violin case in hand, his name printed on a plastic ID card clipped to his collar. He didn't feel out of place, exactly, but he didn't feel ready either. His roommate Luca had shown him around earlier that morning. A soft-spoken boy from Italy, Luca played cello and loved chocolate croissants. He wasn't much of a talker, but when they did speak, it felt easy. "You compose?" Luca asked the night they moved in. Eli shrugged. "A little." Luca smiled and said, "Then we'll make something together soon." There was comfort in that, in not having to explain everything. Eli's first week was overwhelming. Each day started at 6:30 a.m. with theory class, followed by technical warm-ups, solo rehearsals, and small group ensembles. His evenings were booked with sight-reading drills and ear training. Weekends included performance critique sessions, where students played for their peers and endured feedback both blunt and brilliant. Most of the students came from elite backgrounds, trained since age 4, coached by private tutors, fluent in back and list like second languages. Eli wasn't intimidated, but he was startled by how fast everything moved. How sharp some students were. Technically perfect, emotionally intense. Some, like Veronica, played like fire. Others, like Miles, were methodical and untouchable. Eli listened to them and felt his own playing unravel in his mind. Not because it was worse, just different. When he first played during class, he didn't use sheet music. He performed a short original piece that started with a single unresolved chord and moved through irregular time signatures. The room went still. Then, softly, Professor Vincent, a stern man with silver-rimmed glasses, simply said, "You lack form." Eli nodded, unsure if that was a compliment or an insult. Vincent folded his arms and added, "But there are things that cannot be taught. What you have, it's not polish, it's presence." That stayed with Eli. Still, the days were heavy. Eli practiced 6, sometimes 7 hours daily. His fingertips developed calluses. His bowing arm ached. There were days he cried quietly in the practice room, unsure if he could keep up. There were moments he thought about home, the smell of chai in the kitchen, the creak of their apartment, the hallway, the mop bucket rattling in the janitor's closet. But each time he wanted to give up, he remembered Samir's words from the letter. Music isn't for applause, it's for truth. One Saturday evening, as autumn leaves fell outside and campus grew quieter, Luca knocked on his door. He held out a sheet of music, his own composition. "Duet," he said. "You said you write. Let's finish this." They worked all night, adjusting phrasing, layering harmonies, debating tempo. Eli added a bridge that climbed emotionally. Luca slowed the final note to linger like breath. By dawn, they had created something alive. A month later, they performed the piece at a student showcase. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And when the last note faded and applause rose from the small theater, Eli felt something stronger than pride. He felt belonging. Back in his room that night, he took out the old violin, not the new one the academy gave him, but the one wrapped in cloth from home. He placed it on the bed, opened the case. Inside, the letter was still tucked beneath the velvet. He didn't need to read it again. He had memorized every word, but he held the instrument, ran his fingers across its worn wood, and smiled. This was where he had come from. That violin had taught him how to speak. Before Boston, before technique, before form, and someday he would return to it, not just to remember but to remind himself. He didn't start this journey to impress anyone. He started it to be heard. 6 months passed. The days at Ryan Academy became routine, but never dull. Eli had grown not just as a violinist, but as a person. His posture changed, his ear sharpened, his bow hand steadied. The once anxious boy from Greenville was no longer hesitant to speak through music. And then came the winter concert, the final performance of the term. It was Thomas Rain's decision to put Eli last in the lineup. "Closing the show," he said with a knowing smile, "draws the final line." That evening, the concert hall was packed. Faculty, students, producers, and even music journalists filled the velvet seats. The lights were soft, the stage polished, and anticipation pulsed like a heartbeat. Backstage, Eli adjusted the collar of his black shirt. The same violin sat in his hands, not the one from home, but the professional one gifted by the academy. Yet even now, the old one stayed close, in his dorm room, wrapped in cloth, resting like memory. His nerves buzzed, but not from fear. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about honoring everything that had brought him here. Before stepping on stage, Eli paused near the wing curtain and closed his eyes. He imagined the janitor's closet back at Greenville, the squeaky mop cart, the faint hum of overhead lights, the gentle nods from his father after each practice session, the steam from 2 cups of chai at the dinner table. He whispered softly under his breath, "For you, Dad." Then he walked onto the stage. The lights warmed his face. The audience fell into stillness. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Eli stood alone, center stage, in the spotlight. No introduction, just him and his music. He lifted the violin to his shoulder and began. The piece was one he had written himself, an original composition in 3 movements. The first movement opened with a gentle, melancholic motif built from a tune Samir used to hum while sweeping hallways. A quiet theme Eli had once played in secret, unsure if anyone else would ever hear it. It lingered like memory, soft and steady. The second movement surged forward, layered, urgent, almost chaotic. It reflected the journey, fear, doubt, and determination. Phrases bent, twisted, then resolved as if searching for direction. The final movement slowed again, returning to the original theme, but this time more mature. The notes weren't just repeated, they were fuller, heavier, like someone who had traveled far and come home changed. The last note hung in the air, fragile, suspended, and then silence, a deep, reverent pause. Then came the applause, rising, thunderous, immediate. The entire room stood, some clapped, some wiped their eyes. Even Professor Vincent, usually reserved, stood up and nodded once with solemn pride. From the back of the room, Thomas Rain watched with a satisfied smile. He didn't just see talent, he saw a boy who had found his voice. That week, a short article was published in a national music magazine. Eli Samir, the janitor's son who made the room go still. The subtitle was a quote, "My first teacher was my father. He was a janitor, but he taught me to hear music." Back in Greenville, Samir read the article in a quiet cafe. He didn't visit often now. He worked part-time at a local music club for underprivileged children, teaching them to hold a violin for the first time, to listen, to breathe. When he saw the interview, he didn't cry, at least not openly, but when the waitress noticed him. Wiping his eyes, she asked, "Sir, are you all right?" Samir smiled, folded the magazine, and shook his head. "Everything is fine," he said gently. "It's just happiness." Greenville went on as it always had. Elections, new buildings, school renovations. The auditorium where Eli first played was now named after a local donor, and Langford's name had disappeared from all plaques, quietly, permanently. No one missed him. But somewhere in Boston, the boy he once tried to humiliate was now playing on bigger stages, louder ones that listened, not because of PR or connections, but because of truth. In his dorm room, Eli wrote a letter. He slipped it into an envelope and labeled it simply, "To Dad." Inside it said, "I played our song. They heard it, and they stood." Final. Reflections. Music isn't about who plays louder or who has the best stage. It's about who plays honestly, who dares to show their soul. Sometimes all it takes is one evening, one performance, one voice that refuses to be silent. So if you have a note, play it. Even if your violin is old, even if the room is full of indifferent faces, even if your hands shake. Sometimes 3 minutes is enough for the world to remember your name.